And a very happy day, ladies and gentlemen. Tim Burgess back with Think and Grow Rich. And once again, the chapter on faith. And today we'll wrap it up. And to make sure you don't miss any of the videos we do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and do it right now. Before we dive into this thing, hit the subscribe button right now. Hit the like, notification, all those little buttons that are out there. Do that. Do us a favor and hit those for us. Leave us a comment. How do you like the series that we're doing? If you like it, great. If you don't like it, tell us what we can do better. We're open. We have an open mind to suggestions, so please don't hesitate. Well, remember in the chapter on faith, he starts it off, he says, faith is the visualization of and belief in attainment of desire. So we have to visualize what we want and then develop belief inside of us that we can actually have what we wrote down in the 6 steps, the chapter on desire. We talked about how the only way to develop faith where faith does not already exist is through the repetition of orders to the subconscious mind. In other words, repetitively study the same thing over and over again, just like math class. We talked about how faith is the eternal elixir, and when we mix faith with the thoughts for the passage to the subconscious, it translates that into its spiritual equivalent and then transmits it out to infinite intelligence. Just like prayer, same thing, no different at all. We talked about the self-confidence formula. And the first step of the self-confidence formula was that I know that I have the ability to achieve my definite chief aim in life. So what did we write down in step 1 of the 6 steps? Number 2 in that was I realized the dominating thoughts of my mind will eventually reproduce themselves. The third one was I know through the principle of auto-suggestion or, excuse me, self-suggestion. We use self-suggestion, right? Through the principle of self-suggestion, any desire I persistently hold in my mind will translate itself into its physical equivalent. Fourth, I have clearly written down a description of my definite chief aim. Steps 1 through 6 in the last chapter, right? And 5, I fully realize that no wealth or position can long endure unless built upon truth and justice. Therefore, I will engage in no transaction that does not benefit all whom it affects. And we're reading that self-confidence formula once a day. Hopefully we have it close to us. We're reading it every day. That's what it is, self-confidence formula. Then we talked about how this one man, induced 200 million people to follow him because of his faith in what he wanted to pull off. And they followed him. He didn't have any machinery, no guns of war, none of this stuff. But he wanted freedom for the people. And he got it. And today I'd like to talk about how one guy implemented the use of faith, and he created from one idea in his mind a $600 million profit for the investors. And that profit came pretty much immediately after this idea was brought into fruition. Napoleon says it's a pretty after-dinner speech for about $1 billion. And he talks about this guy named Schwab and how Charles Schwab was introduced to Eastern banking society. Now, he'd never been introduced to these people before, but he bestowed a great deal of hospitality on a guy named J. Edward Simmons and Charles Stuart Smith. Now, these names will not mean anything to you. I get it. They don't mean anything to me either. I don't care who Charles Smith is. I don't even know the guy. I never heard of him. What I want you to grab from this is how one man, Charles Schwab, you may have heard of this guy, but one man took one idea that he had and he didn't stop until he brought it into fruition. So it's very interesting. And once again, if you have the book, read the story. I'm not going to go through the story in minute by minute detail or word for word. I believe I would bore you to tears if I did that. However, you may find by reading the story that you really grasp more of what Schwab pulled off. So at this dinner, there's 80 people there, and these people represented billions of dollars. J.P. Morgan was there, and if you've not heard of J.P. Morgan, you probably have heard of Chase Bank. Well, Morgan Chase Bank. And at one time, J.P. Morgan has so much money, he had to loan the United States government money so they didn't go bankrupt. Yeah, J.P. Morgan had that much money. Okay, so JP Morgan's at this dinner and 80 other financiers are at this dinner, and Schwab is told that he's got about 15 minutes to speak to these people, and he should really keep it the very polite, very short, Napoleon says vaporings. I love the wording. In other words, he shouldn't ramble on much. And Schwab takes the stage, or the podium, if you will, and he talks for about 90 minutes. And literally, he sweeps these people right off their feet. Absolutely sweeps them off their feet. And after he's done, he and JP Morgan, they find themselves in a windowsill, dangling their legs, talking for about an hour more. See, the magic of the Schwab personality had been turned on full force. But what was more important and lasting was the full-fledged, clear-cut program he laid down for the aggrandizement of steel. Basically, he wanted to bring the steel houses under one big umbrella. Now, at the time he worked for, and he was the president of Andrew Carnegie's steel corporations. So, a lot of people have tried to do this in the past. A lot of people tried to put together these trusts, if you will, or bring it all together under one umbrella, but nobody had the charm and the magnetism and the charisma that Schwab had to create the idea and then transfer that idea into the minds of the people who had the money who could back it up. JP Morgan being the main money master behind it. And if he couldn't get JP Morgan on board, he wasn't going to pull it off ever. So the financial magnetism that began to attract thousands of small and sometimes inefficiently managed companies into large and competition-crushing combinations had become operative in the steel world through the devices of a guy named John Gates. And many called him a business pirate. Gates already formed the American Steel and Wire Company out of a chain of small companies. So this one guy, he was already at work trying to build this big umbrella. Call it a monopoly. That's what they're calling it. And eventually we know what happened to the monopolies. But once again, let's stay out of that. Let's keep our mind open to the one idea that one guy had. One idea. And oh, by the way, you have an idea that's equally as large. It's just wrapped up in there somewhere. So this has already been done before. But by the side of Carnegie's gigantic vertical trust, a trust owned and operated by 53 partners. So Carnegie wasn't the only one. He had partners. Those other combinations were nothing. They might combine to their heart's content, but the whole lot of them couldn't make a dent in the Carnegie organization, and Morgan knew that. So the eccentric old Scot knew it too. And Napoleon says, from the heights of Skibo Castle, he had witnessed, first with amusement and then with resentment, the attempts of these smaller companies to cut into his business. When the attempts became too bold, Carnegie's temper was translated into anger and then, of course, retaliation. And we know that's never a good thing. So even though these guys had it all going on, they still had little flaws in their personality that came to the surface from time to time. So what he did, he tried to duplicate every mill owned by his rivals, even though he had no interest in that. So in other words, they were all in competition. They got out of creation. Bad idea. He hadn't been interested in any of this stuff. Instead, he was content to sell such companies the raw steel they needed to do that. So it was in the speech of Schwab that Morgan saw the answer to his problem of combination. See, a trust without Carnegie, giant of them all, would be no trust at all. So in other words, if he couldn't get Carnegie's companies, then there would be no reason to undertake this. So Schwab's speech on the night of December 12th undoubtedly carried the inference, though not the pledge, that the vast Carnegie enterprise could be brought under the Morgan tent. He talked of the world future for steel, of reorganization for efficiency, of specialization, of the scrapping of unsuccessful mills, and concentration of effort on the flourishing properties, of economies in the ore traffic, economies in overhead and administrative departments, capturing foreign markets. In other words, Schwab had a plan put together. Remember step 4 in the 6-step process? Create a definite plan and begin at once, whether you're ready or not. Remember that? So Schwab was going against everybody who wanted to take the price of steel up. Schwab wanted to take the price of steel down. And here's what he said. The short-sightedness of such policy, he told his hearers, lay in the fact that it restricted the market in an era when everything cried for expansion. By cheapening the cost of steel, he argued, an ever-expanding market would be created. More uses for steel would be devised, and a goodly portion of the world trade could be captured. Actually, though he did not know it, Schwab was an apostle of modern mass production. Well, think about it. Yes, he was. So the dinner at the University Club comes to an end. Morgan goes home to think about the prediction. Schwab goes back to Pittsburgh to run the steel business for Carnegie. And the rest of them go back to work and whatever they were doing. And it was not long coming. It only took Morgan about a week to digest the Feast of Reason and to determine that no financial indigestion would come from him undertaking this. All he had to do now would Carnegie sell. So, that was the thing. Would Carnegie sell, and for how much? So Schwab gets together with Morgan and Robert Bacon, who was Schwab's assistant, Morgan's assistant, and John Gates. So the four of these guys get together and they talk about the value of each of the properties and how much each one of them is worth, and they go through the money and they go through the plan. And throughout the entire conference, Schwab's figures were never questioned. If he said a company was worth so much, then it was worth that much and no more. See, nobody knew more about manufacturing and marketing of steel than Schwab did. Carnegie didn't. Morgan didn't. Schwab understood that business. And Schwab left out by design a good number of companies that just wanted to unload their junk, if you will, on the broad Morgan shoulders. Schwab wasn't interested in that either. So they go through these figures all night. Dawn comes, Morgan rises, strained his back, and only one question remained. Will Carnegie sell? And if so, how much? Schwab thought about $320 million. Now remember, this is late 1800s, early 1900s, folks. About $320 million. So who knows if he's going to sell or not? Nobody does. So there's a golf game. Schwab and Carnegie are playing golf. Not a mention of business is made. However, when they get together at the Carnegie cottage after the golf game, they talked about it. And Schwab poured out the glittering promises of retirement and comfort, of the untold millions to satisfy his caprices, satisfy his desire to give. And Carnegie capitulated, wrote a figure on a slip of paper, handed it to Schwab, and said, all right, that's what I'll sell for. And it was $400 million. It was $320 million mentioned, and then adding $80 million to represent the increased capital value over the previous 2 years. So later in the year, later in the month, all it says is later, on the deck of a transatlantic liner. So in other words, Carnegie and J.P. Morgan are on the same boat, the same transatlantic liner. And Carnegie says to Morgan, I wished I'd asked you for $100 million more. Morgan simply says, if you had asked for it, you would have gotten it. Right there is a lesson, ladies and gentlemen. What are we asking for? See, he asked for $400 million. He said I should have asked for another $100 million. Morgan says if you would have asked for it, you would have gotten it. Why didn't he ask for it? So even back then, are we asking for enough? I'm not saying be greedy or anything like that. So the 38-year-old Schwab had his reward. He was made president of the new corporation and remained in control until 1903. Napoleon says the dramatic story of big business, which you have just finished, was included in this book because it is a perfect illustration of the method by which desire can be transmuted into its physical equivalent. He says, I imagine some readers will question the statement that a mere intangible desire can be converted into its physical equivalent. Doubtless some will say, you cannot convert nothing into something. The answer is in the story of the United States Steel Corporation. The giant organization was created in the mind of one man. The plan by which the organization was provided with the steel mills that gave it financial stability was created in the mind of the same man. His faith, his desire, his imagination, his persistence were the real ingredients that went into United States Steel. The steel mills and mechanical equipment acquired by the corporation after it had been brought into legal existence were incidental. But careful analysis will disclose the fact that the appraised value of the properties acquired by the corporation increased in value by an estimated $600 million by the mere transaction which consolidated them under one management. In other words, Charles Schwab's idea, plus the faith with which he conveyed it to the minds of J.P. Morgan and the others, was marketed for a profit of approximately $600 million. Not an insignificant sum for a single idea. What idea are you holding on to? Remember, riches begin in the form of thought. The amount is limited only by the person in whose mind the thought is put into motion. Faith removes limitations. Remember this when you are ready to bargain with life for whatever it is that you ask as your price for having passed this way. Remember also that the man who created the United States Steel Corporation was practically unknown at the time. He was merely Andrew Carnegie's Man Friday until he gave birth to his famous idea. After that, he quickly rose to a position of power, fame, and riches. Napoleon wraps up this chapter. He says, there are no limitations to the mind except those we acknowledge. Both poverty and riches are the offspring of thought. So what is the dominating thought that you're housing in your mind on this day? Is it positive or is it negative? Because that's up to you. As always, ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank Joe. Joe, thank you so much for all you do. Without you, we wouldn't be here. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. The next chapter we come out with on auto-suggestion. Remember, we changed it to self-suggestion. I'll explain the difference in the first video on that chapter. That is the most important part of the foundation that we are building. So make sure you hit the subscribe button and don't miss any of that video series that we do on that chapter. And once again, we desire this day be the very best day you have ever experienced in this game we call life. Yesterday doesn't matter, it's already gone. Tomorrow isn't here, you can plan for it, but you can't do anything but prepare for it. Can't do anything else about it. However, today, we can decide right now that today will be the best day I've ever experienced. Why? Because I'm allowing it to be. That's why. Tonight, when you put your head on the pillow, please do so with a mind full of peace. Calmness of mind is one of the beautiful jewels of wisdom. And may God bless each and every one of you. Have a fabulous day.